Believe it or not, it's been nearly 5 years since the last Elder Scrolls game came out. And what's even worse is that in all likelihood we're gonna have to wait even longer until the Elder Scrolls 6 is released. The earliest this game could hit stores is realistically around 2017, and even that's being a little bit hopeful. The thing is, I'm not sure about you guys, but I am totally okay with waiting, and the reason I say that is that I truly feel like Bethesda can blow this game out of the water given what they've learned from previous Elder Scrolls as well as Fallout games, but they need to take their time and not rush things. Regardless, the point is that Bethesda's next big project is most likely going to be the Elder Scrolls 6, so in honor of that, I'm here today to talk to you guys about what I think Bethesda needs to do in order to make the Elder Scrolls 6 a perfect game. Also, I just want to say before getting into this that I unfortunately don't have time to address everything in depth, so I'll almost definitely be delving a lot deeper into these topics individually in future videos. First, let's go ahead and talk quests in the Elder Scrolls 6. As for the main quest, I want to see the Daedric Princes return and play a major role in the main quest. I don't know about you guys, but I personally feel like anything associated with the Daedra in the Elder Scrolls is absolute gold, and that's one of the reasons why Oblivion was so damn good. If Bethesda could do something similar in the Elder Scrolls 6, that would be awesome if you ask me. Next, I would certainly like for the dragons to return, but more importantly, I want the Dragon Priests to return. The dragons were cool and all, but I felt like combat with them was a little bit repetitive at times, but the Dragon Priests were a completely different story. They were challenging and incredibly fun to fight, so bringing them back would be an awesome addition to the game. The only problem with the return of the dragons and the Dragon Priests is I'm not too sure if this would work out with Elder Scrolls lore, but Bethesda has been known to stretch lore in the past in order to provide a better game experience, so it's definitely still possible. Finally, I'd like to see some quests related to vampires and werewolves in the Elder Scrolls 6, and the reason I say this is I feel like the vampire and werewolf quests from Skyrim were a great idea, but executed somewhat poorly. If they could do a better job with them in the next Elder Scrolls game, and potentially give us some cool quests and potentially even factions involving vampires and werewolves, that would be awesome. Alright, and speaking of factions, let's go ahead and move into a discussion of factions in the Elder Scrolls 6 for the next few minutes. Overall, I don't really have too much to say on this because Bethesda usually does an amazing job with the factions, but there are a couple of things that I like to see. For one, despite how awesome the factions were in Skyrim, I feel like a lot of the faction storylines could have been a little bit better. The Dark Brotherhood was phenomenal, but I feel like the other storylines could have been improved. Oblivion's storylines were definitely better at times, so if Bethesda could look back to that game, I think it would really help them to revamp the faction stories. I also would like for us to have more options in the storylines, as in different paths for us to take with regards to the faction, sort of how Fallout 4 had multiple endings, although perhaps not on the same scale as Fallout 4. All I'm looking for is some extra player choice in the faction quests, since doing so could give us a deeper and more immersive experience. Additionally, it would be really nice if after we became the leader of a respective faction, there was a little bit more for us to do. I feel like for all the factions in Skyrim, there was just nothing to do after you became the leader of the Dark Brotherhood or the Companions, for instance, but I would like for that to change. Finally, just to spice things up, I would really like to see an all-new faction, just because I feel like it would be a nice breath of fresh air and a good way to spice things up. Obviously, I would rather them perfect the standard factions like the Dark Brotherhood, Thieves Guild, etc. first, but if they do have the resources to make a new faction that's different from any we've seen in the Elder Scrolls so far, that would be really cool and a great addition to the game. Moving on, let's go ahead and talk graphics, and to be honest, I really don't have too much to say on this one. All I want in this game are good or slightly above average graphics, but I don't want it to be Bethesda's main focus. I've always advocated playability and experience over graphics, and this is no exception. Bethesda absolutely has to prioritize other aspects of the game over graphics if they want it to be a success. But the one thing I will say is that it needs to run on 60 FPS on console. There's really no excuse for that now with next generation consoles and such. Next, let's go ahead and talk loading screens, bugs, and glitches. In an interview, Todd Howard was asked a question about loading screens and talked about how using some of the extra power provided by more powerful PCs and next generation consoles could potentially allow Bethesda to eliminate loading screens, and considering how much time they have for this game, I really feel like it's possible for them to do so. Actually, on second thought, perhaps eliminating them completely is a bit unrealistic, but I would like to see the number of them severely reduced. Also, Bethesda really needs to take care of bugs and glitches before they release this game. They said that they would fix that with Fallout 4, and while it definitely wasn't as bad as some previous Bethesda releases, there were still a ton of bugs at that game's release. Moving on once again, let's go ahead and talk about something pretty important here, and that is the perk/skill system and the leveling system. So overall, I thought Skyrim's perk system was very well done. The division of skills and perk branching in that game were phenomenally carried out and added a lot of depth. I would definitely say that's one improvement over the previous Elder Scrolls. As such, what I'm looking for is a similar system but expanded and with even more complexity. A lot of people say that you shouldn't overcomplicate a perk system, and while I agree with that to some extent, I still think the perk system could get even more in depth. Give us so many options with our perks that we can almost get lost in the perk trees in Elder Scrolls 6, while at the same time keeping each individual perk meaningful. The more complex the system, the more you can differentiate your characters between playthroughs, which adds more replay value to the game and ultimately is a central part of Bethesda games. It would also be cool to see something like acrobatics return in the next Elder Scrolls game, since that was something pretty cool from Oblivion. Finally, I want to see Bethesda combine some of the less useful skills from previous games so as to prevent certain skills from being far overpowered or underpowered in comparison to others. For instance, I definitely feel like they could have combined pickpocket and lockpicking in Skyrim, since neither are nearly as useful as something like conjuration or one-handed, for instance. Especially in Skyrim, there were some skills that were less useful than others, and I'd like to see Bethesda work on that by combining skills as necessary. Next, let's go ahead and move on to a somewhat related topic, and that is magic, and specifically, I want to focus on magic skills and perks. Now, I'm not gonna lie here, magic needs a lot of work if we're looking at Skyrim, which by the way, I'm generally taking Skyrim as the building point for the next Elder Scrolls game, since after all, it was the last game. When I say that magic could really use some work, specifically I'm referring to the fact that alteration and destruction were sorely underpowered in Skyrim. I'd love for them to return, at least in part, to what they did in Oblivion by making destruction a much more useful and viable option. What Bethesda needs to do is create a more balanced set of magic skills, spells, and perks so as to not make certain skills useless or clearly less powerful than others. Also, I'd like to see them potentially introduce an all-new school of magic that we've never seen before, just for a nice breath of fresh air, as was the case with the new faction. I feel like it would be a great way to spice things up and keep the Elder Scrolls from getting too repetitive. Okay, so the next thing I want to discuss is pretty vital, and that is the game's location. With regards to the setting of the Elder Scrolls 6, the most important thing for me is that it's something new and creative. Oblivion's setting was a bit bland at times, which is not at all me hating on the game, and while Skyrim's setting was pretty epic, I still think Bethesda can get even more creative than Skyrim or Cyrodiil. So I personally am looking for Bethesda to take this game to a completely new and unexplored region of Tamriel, and I feel like most people, including Bethesda, are with me on this one. If Bethesda does indeed go to an all-new province, then they pretty much have four options: the Black Marsh or Argonia, the Somerset Isles, Elsewhere, and Valenwood. Of these, I definitely like the Black Marsh and the Somerset Isles the best. With regards to the Somerset Isles, it's a bit problematic as a setting because it's home to the Thalmor, who are sort of xenophobic, so it's doubtful that they would allow other races such as Nords, Argonians, etc. inside the Somerset Isles, but if Bethesda could somehow find a way to make this work, I think it would be really interesting as a setting. I'd say that all of us are pretty eager to know more about the High Elves and their home. A slightly more viable and also very cool option is the Black Marsh, and the Black Marsh would no doubt be completely different and completely new from previous Elder Scrolls settings, since one, it's home to the Argonians, and two, it's literally a massive, creepy, and really cool swampy marshland. But also, the Black Marsh is right next to Morrowind, which gives us the possibility of potentially entering into Morrowind for the second time in the Elder Scrolls. And I'm pretty sure that all Elder Scrolls fans would love to go back to Morrowind since it's such a cool province in Tamriel. Alright, now let's go ahead and transition to a discussion of weapons and armor in the Elder Scrolls 6. The first thing I want to see is a more in-depth crafting system for weapons and armor that includes even more options than in Skyrim. Overall, I thought the Skyrim smithing and crafting system was not so bad, so I'm looking for them to take the same foundation and expand on it quite a bit. But also, I want to see a weapon modding system that is similar to Fallout 4's. This was definitely one thing that Fallout 4 did really well, and I feel like if Bethesda could sort of combine Skyrim smithing with Fallout 4's weapon modding, it would be insanely successful. In addition, it would be nice to get some new types of warrior weapons besides just the normal swords, axes, and maces. Perhaps scythes, halberds, and spears could be added to the game. I would also like for them to include some new types of armor and also to give us a better distinction between light and heavy armor. Obviously, there were some pretty significant differences between the two in past Elder Scrolls games, but it would be nice if in the next game, Bethesda could accentuate the differences to the point where the benefits of heavy armor were completely different from those of light armor, such that one wouldn't necessarily be better than another, but they would each have their own sort of separate uses. Finally, I feel like a lot of the unique weapons in Skyrim were really not that good. One thing I feel like Fallout 4 did well was the legendary enemy and weapon system, so if Bethesda could do something along the lines of that, I actually think it would work out pretty well. Now let's go ahead and move on to dialogue, and this one is incredibly important to me. I repeat, I do not want the Fallout 4 dialogue system. I actually like the Skyrim system quite a bit, so if they could take that as the foundation and build from there, I think it would work out pretty well. At the same time though, I really feel like a lot of the conversations in Skyrim could get a little bit bland. To spice things up, what I'd like to see is more unique dialogue options, such as for instance, if you've got a certain skill in destruction magic, then you might have exclusive options when talking to certain characters, or if you have a certain smithing skill, you have unique options with blacksmiths and stuff of that nature. It would be damn cool if stuff like this was extremely prevalent in conversations across the world of the Elder Scrolls 6, as I feel like it could really provide for a more immersive experience. And lastly, I really don't think they should bother with a voice protagonist for the Elder Scrolls 6, because for one, it didn't really work out all that well in Fallout 4, and for two, I'd rather they put their resources into different things than the voice protagonist. Next, I want to briefly talk followers in the Elder Scrolls 6. One thing Fallout 4 did very well was the interactions you could have with your followers was very in-depth, but at the same time, the number of choices you had for followers was pretty limited. What I think Bethesda needs to do is balance the number of possible followers in the game with the depth of the relationship and the dialogue that you can engage in with them. Skyrim had a lot of followers, but you definitely couldn't interact with them in the same way as in Fallout 4. Also, a lot of the followers in Skyrim were sort of boring and useless. So what I think Bethesda needs to do is eliminate any useless followers and instead put effort into allowing us to have deeper relationships and a more immersive experience with our followers. Finally, to end things off, let's discuss environments. And I already touched on this a bit when talking about the game's location, but there are a few more things I want to bring up here. For starters, I feel like the cities in the Elder Scrolls could be a little bit more realistic, and by this I mean a lot of the cities aren't nearly as bustling and full of people as they ought to be. I would love for cities in the Elder Scrolls to get much more in-depth and be filled with more NPCs and things to do than ever before, because it would give us more to do in cities, and also it would just be more realistic. Additionally, a lot of people have been talking about destructible environments in this game, and I personally am not too sure how that would work out. Since if done poorly, it could fail pretty badly, and I would rather Bethesda put their effort into more important things. But hey, if they are able to pull it off, then more power to them. Well, alright folks, that is pretty much going to do it for this video. As always, if you enjoyed, be sure to drop me a like down below, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more Elder Scrolls content in the future. One more comment I do want to make here though before ending things off. There are a ton more things I could discuss and speculate on with regards to the Elder Scrolls 6, and I really haven't even scratched the surface of this game. Unfortunately, the number of things to address when talking about the Elder Scrolls 6 is way too much for just one video, so if I missed anything in this video, then I sincerely apologize. And because of this, you guys can definitely expect more Elder Scrolls discussion and speculation videos in the future, where I'll be sure to touch on some of the issues that I missed in this video. Otherwise, I hope you all have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you in my next video.